Okay, everybody comfortable? Cell phones off, right? Okay, here we go.
From Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and the Palatial FYC studios, you are listening to All Things Considered.
The show where we ask you to consider all things as opposed to take a look at a single film for your consideration. I'm your host, Dustin Friesenan.
And I'm your host, Mike Josic, and we'd like to welcome everybody checking the show out on all the different podcasting platforms, catching the show on YouTube, catching the show on Apple Podcasts. While you're there, throw us a bone, like and review the show. It's always helpful to get that follow, get that share, get that subscribe.
Get those sweet digital numbers.
For those of you who are unfamiliar with the show, if this is your first time here, just be warned, spoilers ahead. We talk about the films pretty explicitly.
Properly?
Properly, yeah. It's so much harder to talk around them rather than just talk about them. So, and if you're a regular listener to the show, welcome back. Happy to see you again. So this time around, as we announced on our last episode, we are going to be discussing a film that's kind of been bumped a couple times at this point.
We will be continuing our series of films that we thought were on the list but are not on the list.
And when you say we, you mean me.
I mean lots of things. No names will be mentioned, just,
And that film in question is the 1982 thriller? Drama?
Action?
What does Wikipedia classify? Wikipedia classifies it as an action film. I actually think it's a little bit more of a drama than an action film. Or a thriller.
And I would agree.
Yeah. But yeah, that film is 1982's Sylvester Stallone starring First Blood. So when this movie was first picked, I basically just wanted to see the movie again. And it was a few months ago. And I wasn't even thinking about how relevant it was going to be. And just in the process of watching it, I was like, yeah, this is timely. And I thought it would be great for the show. And for some reason, I really did think it was on the Sight and Sound list. But Dustin, you said that you also got kind of like enthused when I told you that I was wanting to do this movie, and we just decided to make it an All Things Considered episode. So
the way I remember it, you realized that it wasn't a film on the list, and I was like, no, you know what? I actually really want to see it. So I saw it with my wife, and I was like, man, this shit is relevant.
Super relevant.
We should talk about this. And now we waited until it's not as relevant, and now we're sending it out.
And
that is how we operate here.
I thought, it's not as relevant because that a lot of the stuff that was kind of happening a few months ago isn't happening now with the protests.
Except the thing is, protests are still going on. That's the thing. We're not hearing about it anymore because the news cycle is getting bored with it. But then you have the SARS protests in Nigeria as well. It's not an isolated thing.
And there is still, every day I see news on my news feed about police brutality and conflict escalation being handled extremely poorly. So yeah, embarrassingly, this movie is 38 years old. It's almost 40 years old, and it's still basically textbook.
Good job, team.
So I'll do a quick run through the credits, and we will get to discussing the film in earnest. So First Blood was directed by Ted Kotcheff. It was produced by Buzz Feitshans. Screenplay was by Michael Kozel, William Sackheim, and Sylvester Stallone. It was based on First Blood by David Morrell. It starred Sylvester Stallone, Richard Crenna, and Brian Dennehy. Music was by Jerry Goldsmith. Cinematography was by Andrew Laszlo. Edited by Joan Chapman. Distributed by Orion Pictures and released on October 22nd, 1982. The film was quite popular in its time. It did get mixed reviews, but did well at the box office. Obviously, it has spawned like 4 sequels at this point.
5, I think.
We've got Rambo, First Blood Part 2. We've got Rambo 3. We've got Rambo.
Yeah, there's 4 sequels.
Yeah,
and then so Rambo went down to of varying quality and relevance, especially given that number 2 has Rambo teaming up with the Taliban. So that doesn't quite age quite as well.
That's actually Rambo 3. That's when he's in Afghanistan.
Apologies.
Although it would be really
it's still funny.
It would be really interesting if Rambo teamed up with the Taliban to free prisoners of war in Vietnam. Over time, the film, I think that mixed reception has kind of, like a lot of films, been ironed out. Critics, fans, this is actually a really highly regarded film, mostly positive reception with pretty decent reviews. As it is not on the Sight and Sound list, we will jump into the discussion. Dustin, I'm not sure how many times you've seen the film, but what was your take on watching First Blood again?
I think it's my third time watching it, and I know going in and the other times I've seen it, I compared it to other Vietnam era movies that are sort of Vietnam vets, because you've got stuff like Jacob's Ladder, where a Vietnam vet sort of dealing with PTSD, which happens to be something a bit more. This one's a Vietnam vet also dealing with PTSD, but how he's received by others around him, as John Rambo is just trying to hitchhike back home or find some sort of job, because he's effectively a hobo at this point. And Brian Dennehy is a complete turd and tries to get him the heck out of his town for the crime of existing, and eventually arrests him, and things just go downhill from there.
I do want to jump in and say that we don't actually know what his like financial or housing situation is currently.
Well, they did mention that he had like jobs in car washes and was just all over different states.
Yes. And I mean, for me, like one of the pivotal moments in the film is right at the beginning. And I think from that point, we'll probably talk about that more in a bit, but from that point, he probably is, as you say, a hobo.
Because he's talking about how his speech at the end, how they're forgotten, they're thrown to the side, that people spit on him. He's having a hard time keeping a job. He's going into PTSD flashbacks at other job places, and people at car washes and fast food joints don't quite appreciate it when you lose your mind and start threatening customers. You lose your job instantly. And there was no support for Vietnam vets. Once the war became unpopular, all of a sudden people were protesting them. It was like the Westboro Baptists protesting funerals of Iraqi vets. And just imagine that all over the country. Right now, we look at the Westboro Baptists like those guys are nut jobs. But imagine that is the entire country. Imagine coming back to that. It'd be nightmarish.
Agreed.
I thought I had cut you off earlier, so I was waiting for you to come back with whatever you were saying.
No, I like the point that I kind of want to discuss. I mean, the format of the show is essentially, you kind of give your first take and then I jump in. But I just wanted to qualify that hobo thing.
And so watching the film this time, what I'm noticing is, as you were talking about earlier on, the police escalation. He gets into town and the sheriff comes by, offers him a little piece of friendly advice that, hey, we don't like your kind around here. And so drops him off the other side of town. And he wants to just get a bite to eat. Where's there a diner? Oh, about 20 miles up the road. So you want him to walk 20 miles to get a burger? Rambo's like, I ain't putting up with that shit. I'm just going to head back. He gets some more crap. And the line I think here that really resonates is when Rambo's just sitting there at the back of the cruiser getting told off. And he's like, why are you pushing me, man? Why are you pushing me?
He's actually sitting in the front seat.
No.
I know it's been a while for you. I was refreshing this morning. So.
Either way, why are you pushing me? Like, what did I ever do to you?
And Dennehy's reaction to that, because he turns to him and he's like, what did you say? Like, Rambo very calmly is just like, why are you pushing me? Like, I didn't do anything. And the sheriff's reaction is to get right up in his face. Like, it's so bold and it's so arrogant and it's so shitty.
How dare you question me?
And like he's instantly reading it as a threat. There's a threat level. It's not a question. It's not a, hey,
it's not a concern. It's not bringing up something that's happening right in front of your face.
And he's treating it like somebody just said, I'm going to kill you or I'm going to stab you in the face or something.
And so he escalates, drops him off at the side of town, picks him up afterwards when Rambo decides he's going to come back, and just arrests him immediately on charges of vagrancy. And Dennehy at this point doesn't actually know anything about him other than he's going around dressed like that he stinks because he hasn't had a shower in a while. So it's, here's a homeless Vietnam vet who's going around, some sort of bum, and he's going to disrupt our small town. And
Rambo's in a headspace right now. He has just found out that the last surviving person in the world that might understand, that was a friend, He goes to visit him. He's clearly been going around trying to find these people to reconnect to the world. I think he's been feeling disconnected. And he finds out that this guy's dead. And that was the pivotal moment that I was kind of referring to earlier. You hear it in the music, and you hear it, or you see it in Stallone's face. He checks out. He's like, oh, there's nothing left for me in this world. And so he just wanders off, and he doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't have any purpose or any direction after that.
He had some excitement in his voice when he was talking to the mom about like, oh yeah, he was a big guy, you know, and he was doing this and blah, blah. Until she says, cancer ate away at him. I could carry him. He was ate down to nothing. And yeah, it kills Rambo. And so he's trying to deal with all that when suddenly there's this asshole sheriff giving him shit for no reason. He knows all of his buddies who died for the country and then who came back to the country and then died afterwards, forgotten by everybody around him. And now here's some asshole coming around giving him shit. It's honestly, to be able to hold back as long as he did and not do anything, that says a lot about Rambo. But the question that came to my mind watching this, I of course compare it to the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm looking at unnecessary escalation for people who did absolutely nothing, from police officers trained to give them crap or who just have their own personal bias. And a lot of people might say, well, Rambo went too far when he starts, you know, shooting up the town and blowing stuff up. But at what point did he go from innocent to it going too far?
And the film never actually defends Rambo's actions. The film never says that he is justified in what he is doing. The film very clearly states from the very beginning that he's in an emotional state. He's got PTSD. He's got these things going on. And
he's a product of what the country and the government have made him to be.
Yeah. And then this shitty cop, just his pride, his machismo, like he just can't stand that somebody is even, politely disobeying him, and he's the law and this is the way things go. And there are a couple of points in the first half an hour of the movie. There's the point at the bottom of that canyon right by the riverbank or the creek bed or whatever, where he's like, okay, someone's already died. This can stop here. And the cop is like, no, it's not going to stop here because this guy was my friend. And what he's doing at that point...
When his deputy starts questioning it, like, man, should we be doing this? And then he's constantly pushing him forward. But yeah, after the buddy dies, he says, man, maybe we should just leave this to the state police. And he grabs him and he's like slapping him around, trying to force him to look at his buddy. I thought that was very well acted. Like he's slapping him around, the hat's falling off. He's out of control. And us as the viewer, we're looking at it and it's like, dude, this is your fault. You've escalated this to this point. The guy started shooting at Rambo hanging from a cliff for no reason. Why are you shooting at him? The helicopter guy's like, stop. Why are you shooting at him? Stop it. Until he's threatened to be shot by the sniper in the helicopter.
And Dennehy knows it's his fault. He knows that he started this, but his pride and his guilt is driving him to blame Rambo because Rambo was the catalyst. If Rambo never entered my town, this never would have happened. And it's like, take some responsibility, you dipshit. And
he almost took some responsibility a little bit when he's talking with the colonel after they thought they killed Rambo in the mines. He doesn't quite accept responsibility. He just says that maybe, well, I sort of almost had something that I might have been able to prevent this, I suppose, perhaps.
You mean the scene in the bar?
The scene in the bar.
Yeah. I love how that turns, though.
Because, of course, the second he realizes Rambo's alive, it's like, nope, fuck this guy.
Yep. So I think that's a really interesting thing about the film, that even though Rambo's literally blowing up a town, it might even be a kind of a hyperbolic example to go that far. But
you don't necessarily have to think of it as hyperbolic, because let's look at Black Lives Matter protests. They've burnt down some police stations.
True.
And so you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, is Rambo justified in doing this? Is Black Lives Matter justified in doing this? And let's say, for the sake of argument, you're saying no. You're saying, no, they're not justified. But you're also saying Rambo's innocent at the beginning. Because let's face it, he did nothing. He did absolutely nothing. Arresting him for vagrancy, that's utter and complete bullshit. He just wanted to go and resisting arrest. When he's being arrested first, here's a fear and a question that I've always had. And of course, as a white male, it's not something that ever really happens to me. But let's say the police send their dogs after me. A police dog is considered to be a police officer. And if you attack that dog, you're attacking an officer. And of course, everyone's going to come to that dog's defense. But those dogs are trained to tear you apart. They send a dog after you, it starts biting you, ripping into your leg. It could get an artery, you could die. And what am I supposed to do? Just let the dog bite me? If I kick it off of my leg because it's injuring me and could kill me, now I'm going to be assaulted. At what point am I allowed to defend myself? When they're beating him down in the basement and spraying him with the cold water hose for no good reason, at what point is he allowed to defend himself?
And to what
Are
degree?
we not allowed? Exactly. At what point are we just supposed to do whatever the police say? And for anyone who has those bigoted views about race and whether or not Black people from whatever walk of life are innocent or guilty, whatever perception you might have, having Rambo being a white victim who is, of course, also a war vet who tend to get praised in the States, minus, of course, Vietnam, it creates a scenario where you have to look at it without the current example. You have to look at it in a bit more of a neutral sense. And so if there's a point where you're like, okay, you know what, Rambo is innocent, then you have to look at all the people who are being killed by police in the States and the riots that they're having and the protests and say, you know what, that's the exact same thing. That's exactly what's going on. So how can you vilify Black Lives Matter and then say, well, Rambo was justified? And that's where I think this movie becomes a great conversation piece.
I agree. And I think there's a fear to actually to look at the cause while you're condemning the effect. Because buildings should not be burned down. None of this stuff should be happening. Looting shouldn't be happening. But when you look at the pressure that these people in these demographics are under, socioeconomic pressure, political pressure.
And they are a product of the way that they were raised. Rambo was a product of how the government trained him. Whereas people who grew up in a slum who might not have access to certain things such as proper education, the jobs in order to pay for fixing that right blinker, any little thing that they might get pulled over for, which creates these odd statistics, they're a product of the country. When you push everyone into slums, when you were a descendant of a slave, you don't have your grandparents giving you the money. You don't have hand-me-downs. You don't have an estate, which other people have. You don't have the same benefits when growing up. And so your kids won't have those same benefits, and goes on from generation to generation. And you talk about the 60s when white people were given all this super cheap land in order to keep Black people out. And you have gentrification and all this stuff. And a lot of it was racially motivated, and the effects of which will lead to how people are raised now and how people are seen in particular.
When late stage capitalism is essentially responsible for all of the shit that you're being subjected to, you're not going to care about that symbol of capitalism, and you're not going to feel that tearing down a Target is like, ooh, what are we doing?
At a certain point, it's the only way to send the message, because if Rambo had said nothing and done nothing and had been killed, they weren't going to do anything.
And the scale of it
in
is
fact,
way
they
off.
didn't do anything really. Then he wasn't fired at all.
The scale of it is completely off. Like to have it escalate that far, but the argument is always, well, this doesn't equal this. And it's like, yeah, but you're still not taking responsibility for your actions that pushed it to that. Like, there were 3 things that you could have done over the course of this period of escalation to de-escalate things, but you chose not to. You chose to be the authoritarian. You chose to be my way is the only way. You chose to dehumanize, denigrate, whatever it is that you're doing to this person, to push them to this level where they were like a cornered animal. Essentially, that's what John Rambo is. He's a cornered animal. And he has the training. He is a Green Beret. He is combat ready. He is combat trained. He is in an environment that he can actually thrive in. And he basically proceeds to engage in like a guerrilla war with this police organization, which continues to chase him because they're like, we can't just let this one go. And so it's pushing.
And the thing is, as you said, They had those chances. When they chased him in the woods the first time, he took out everyone. And he had Dennehy at the tip of a knife. And he said, I could have killed all of you, but I didn't. Let it go. Let it go. And he backs away. That's when he starts calling in the National Guard who are there, who blow him up in the mine. When the colonel's talking to him, his advice is just let him go. He'll wander into town and you can just, some civvy will pick him up in some small town somewhere in a diner and there will be no more problems. The thing is, you wait for that wounded animal trapped in a corner to get tired and fall asleep and you get him then. But no, he insists, no, we have to do it this way. We have to do it the most violent possible way. We have to do it now.
And it's a power play. It's a total power play. And it's trying to assert dominance. It's not trying to get the most satisfactory conclusion.
Outcome.
It's a power play. It's basically swinging his dick around. And it's interesting that you mentioned the National Guard, because I actually forgot about the National Guard, but that brings up another really interesting point. And also
the militarization of the police.
And also it has relevance because what you just said, the militarization of the police, but also those National Guard guys were total dipshits. They were basically just like
weekend warriors, as they say.
Weekend warriors, yeah. And they didn't have the same kind of training, and they have their like ideas of what's cool, and they want action, but then when there is action, they're like afraid, and they're acting not in a professional manner. They don't have the skills or the training to actually de-escalate this on their own. And the
one guy's shouting about how he's got his kids' t-ball game to go to. He tries to order a few people to go up and lay cover files. Like, dude, I'm not getting over this hill. Well, then you do it. Well, no, I'm not doing it, man. I work at a friggin' hardware store. Like, I'm not cut out for this. This is just a weekend thing. And then they just pull out a bazooka because they're crazy. But of course, once they blow stuff up and start talking about how they're going to be on, what is it? That mercenary magazine.
Oh, Soldier of Fortune.
They're talking about being on Soldier of Fortune, and they get the nice cover pick for themselves where they blew up the mine. And at that point, Dennehy, once again, because things seem to be concluded, is a bit more reasonable. It's like, what are you idiots doing? You could have started a fire. You could have done this, could have done that. Dig it out. Clean this up. He's almost reasonable because at that point, he's won. He's swung his dick around. He's proved that he's the biggest, and it's all good for him.
He's like, it's all right to tuck and zip now. It's also interesting you bring up the scene where Rambo does that first subduing of the group and getting, Dennehy with the knife to his neck and telling him, I could have killed all of you and I didn't. Because in the book, this was something that Stallone was actually adamant about when he was going through the script. In the book, Rambo kills a lot of people. After watching the film, I've been wanting to read this book for a really long time. And I kind of had the impression that the book was going to be, I really like this film. I thought the book was going to be like leagues ahead of it. I actually really don't like the book. The book, it portrays just everybody as dicks. And Rambo is just this killing machine. And the sheriff is just this, proud dick swinging, these two titans meet. It's like a boxing match or something. And there's all this collateral damage. And I just don't feel that the message is really there. And I didn't like
it. Has no subtlety or nuance.
Yeah. And throwing that into the film where Rambo only kills either by accident or when pushed to it is such an important part of this movie and the theme of this movie.
I thought he only killed the one guy, the sniper, because of course he's hanging on a cliff and he's
he indirectly kills him. It's the moving of the chopper that ultimately kills that shitty cop that was like abusing him in the police
exactly
station.
It was a complete accident. Everyone else, he has them jump out of the vehicle. He was about to kill Dennehy. That would have been the first purposeful murder. Everything else was just property damage and theft.
And that's super important. That's super important to the story. And I'm not sure where I was going with that now.
Yeah, it lacks all subtlety and nuance. And because of it, the film is actually far better than the book. The film can live on as having something worthwhile talking about and discussing. The film stays relevant as opposed to just being some sort of action flick like the next two become.
It's also interesting to see how this film struggles between being like a serious drama and how it kind of wants to be an 80s action movie.
Especially when the music comes on as he's running around doing whatever survivalist stuff. That music was kind of ridiculous.
I actually really love the score by Goldsmith, and we're going to talk about it later. But
I mean, you can see what they did with the film series later on, where it does become massive body counts all over the place, parodied in stuff like Hot Shots, especially Hot Shots Part 2, where he is actually saving everybody from some sort of, well, wasn't he saving everybody from a Vietnamese POW camp
it's
at
been
the beginning?
so long since I've seen Part 2.
Either way, it's ridiculous. It's just body count. And the fourth one, which goes back to having some message, is still just massive, massive body count.
It's a bit of a flip on this one because it has a real message to it. It's talking about the shit that's going on in Burma, but it's more of your typical action film that's playing with more dramatic thematic elements that are in there, which I think saves it from just being a shitty action film like, the third Rambo was. Whereas this one, I think, has more of the dramatic elements and occasionally slips into 80s action mode. And this one's surprisingly short, too. It's like an hour 33. It's really condensed. It gets to the message quickly. It gets to the action quickly. There's not a lot of fat. It's a pretty lean film. Apparently, the original cut, like the assembly cut, was 3 hours or something. And Stallone, he was like pretty much ready to disown the film. He was like, we've just made the worst thing that I've ever seen in my entire life. And they worked for a really long time to whittle it down and to shape it into kind of what it became. And knowing sort of where the film was and where the film got to is actually a really interesting kind of point for me. And I like the fact,
I do like a lot of Stallone's writing and a lot of the stuff that he does. I just resaw the entire Rocky series, and he's not just some action goober. He knows what the heck he's doing.
He has his ups and downs, but his ups are really good.
They are.
And his role in this film is significant. Like Rocky was kind of his thing, and this was something he kind of fell into. He didn't want to do it at first. The fact that it came out the way that it did has a lot to do with Stallone's performance and Stallone's role in tightening up the script.
He's the one who chose the lack of death, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so kudos to him. And it's interesting too to see where like the series started, and Stallone has like carried the series on for another 4 films, and to kind of see like some of the weird places that it's gone, and and also some of the tonal shifts that it's taken. But
I hear a lot of bad things about the most recent one, but I haven't seen it quite yet.
After watching this one, I'm now kind of curious to see the new one, although I hear the new one is problematic in a lot of ways.
Generally, when it comes to the treatment of, well, this is what Mexicans are like. Every Mexican is just a cartel drug dealer, basically, is sort of what I remember hearing about it in reviews.
Yeah, something like that. But again, you can't really judge it until you see it and go, oh, yeah, that was super racist, or wherever else you want to go with it.
Or maybe people are being too sensitive, or who knows. Hard to tell.
Often hard to tell. You mentioned the music. I do want to talk about the music a little bit. Goldsmith, I love the themes. I love the way he scores this thing. I like how it has that military element to it. It has kind of an adventure feel to it. But he also, I think, gets the emotional bits across. And the music is also used to show you shifts. Because a lot of the acting, again, because this is a really lean movie, there's large chunks of it without dialogue. And the music is there to punctuate or accentuate the performances. There's the moment that I mentioned at the very beginning where Rambo essentially dies, like the world is done for him. Then there's the moment where he gets dropped off at the end of the bridge. And as Dennehy's driving away, Rambo kind of looks off down the road where he's supposed to go. And then he turns around and he starts to walk, and the music changes. And it's a very specific, like, tonal change where this is a microaggression. Like, the cop made his play. The cop pushed him. And this is also an interesting thing about Rambo's character, because Rambo's pushing back. Rambo is testing this cop. Like, they're both at fault.
When they're trying to get his fingerprints, he's constantly resisting them fingerprinting him, and he's not telling him who he is. He's just like, no, I don't respect any of you, so fuck all y'all.
He's uncooperative, but I do think that the burden of patience and tolerance should be on the people with the guns, with the people who have that authority. They should be the ones who are de-escalating and not the ones who are like, oh, you're going to be that way. So
Especially when they're not justified, and he knows it. The thing is, though, even if he knows that he's not justified, when you're that dick swinging egotist, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in the slightest bit. You think yourself justified nonetheless. You'll get those hoops going through your head that you'll let one person do it. It's a slippery slope. All of a sudden, everyone does it. You keep one broken window, and all of a sudden, the entire city goes to hell. So even though they're just dealing a little pot, even though they just stole a loaf of bread, you got to throw them in jail for 20 years because 3 strikes and you're out, buddy.
And what are the rest of the cops going to say behind your back? Or how are they going to think about you and your authority if they see that you didn't assert yourself in this situation and you weren't the macho leader that everybody thought you were?
And that's what they did. He was resisting, so takes the billy club, cracks him in the back. There, now we got him to cooperate. And you talk about the young deputy who's constantly like, I don't know if we should be doing this. I don't know if we should be doing this. They're training him to start doing that. It's either you beat him down to the point where he just goes along with it, or it's somebody who's got that sort of desire for power and who wants to abuse that power. And that's somebody who's probably going to make it further in the police department, because if everyone's a dick, the person who's nice is going to become like Serpico and get his face shot.
And that's also a perfect example of, having young David Caruso in there. And I love David Caruso in that role. Everybody always talks about, there's the all cops are bad. And then there's like, well, these are just the bad apples. Like, where's the in between? Like, where are the good cops? Where are the cops that are not abusing the system, that are not protecting the shit heels, that are not contributing to all this violence and subjugation and bullshit?
They're not speaking up. They're not getting ahead. They're not able to change it from within.
And this perfectly exemplifies, you have this one character he feels really, really bad. And he actually, in the beginning, he kind of speaks up a little more freely, but you see him get slapped down multiple times. And finally you get the thing where Denny, he just like picks him up and starts tossing around like a rag doll. I mean, what is he going to do other than
quit? Is he going to quit?
If he walks away, he's probably fired. And
if he's fired, then you have the one good voice gone. And is that what's going to happen to every single good voice that comes in?
And I mean, he's afraid. Like, it is a legit, like, they show the conflict. And I really appreciate that. It's amazing how this film kind of covers all the bases. You mentioned like the stuff that was kind of going on in the basement of the cop shop. We talked earlier about how Rambo shooting up a town was a level of response that was not commensurate to, kind of what he had to go through. But that's the very definition of escalation. And when you look at Rambo's response, everything from the passive aggressive, the little microaggressions that just get responded not in kind, but with overstatement, with a response from the police that is more about like crushing than just, well, let's find, whatever the balance here is, and let's not make this crazy. Everything he does, they respond to, they overreact. And everything they do, he feels he has to overreact. And it just keeps going.
The thing is, he doesn't even necessarily overreact. He acts on the same level that they brought it to. Because at first you have, he just walks into town, then he kicks him out to the other side. Unjustified. Rambo, it's not escalation. It's not escalation to turn around and walk back into town. Instead, the police have to escalate and arrest him. When he feels that he's arrested without cause, because he really was, he instead doesn't let them fingerprint him and he doesn't cooperate. Not cooperating on level of being arrested without cause, all right. Then they start beating him. They start hosing him down with super cold water.
And making jokes about it the whole time.
So he tosses a few of them around and runs away. He escapes. He defends himself because he's being attacked. He honestly is being attacked. And he goes through a PTSD moment where he thinks they're going to cut his throat because they try to shave him by force with a straight edge, which is crazy talk.
And shave him dry. They weren't allowing him to use the soap.
Exactly. So they're just
fucking deputies, a fucking cunt.
They're just torturing him for no good reason. And so he runs away.
That's the first time cunt has been uttered on this show.
Congratulations, sir. You did it. But running away leads to the police saying, okay, now we're going to shoot him, because they started shooting at him. And when people start shooting at you in the woods, now it's life and death. He didn't even escalate it. He didn't bring it to try and kill them. Instead, he just wounded some of them and let it be. Then they blow up a mine on him. They started using explosives. At that point, he meets them on their level. You blew up what was his home. He's going to start blowing up your home. Like, he never escalated. The police were the only ones who ever did escalate. He just brought it to their level. So I agree. Yeah, the police should have kept it at the level where you don't go above. Rambo never did. And if you look at Black Lives Matter, they really escalating half the time, because the police are doing all sorts of crazy stuff. People are getting killed, people are getting arrested, people are getting detained, and nobody knows where they are. You look back at some of the crazy stuff that happened in the days of the KKK, you've got people getting their houses burnt down, entire communities burnt down. Is it really escalation? Because it's all one continuing thing. You can't look at, oh, this protest is over this one death. No, it's over 200 years worth of your bullshit.
And this touches on that thing that we said earlier, where we were talking about, people look at the effect and are so ready and willing to condemn the effect, but they're not willing to look at the cause and actually think about the causes that have piled up and led to this. Because whatever thing is happening, whatever I'm doing to you, there's a story behind that. So you may have been like a horrible person to me or my family or my whatever, and like I'm reacting to all of that built up stuff. It's literally death of a thousand cuts. It's the straw that broke the camel's back. Yeah.
And so the question then becomes, okay, then how should it have been stopped? At a certain point, somebody has to say, okay, you know what? This has gone too far. We're just going to have to start forgiving all one another. Like, as in the police have to forgive the fact that, okay, our place was burnt down. Okay, we understand why you did that. We're not gonna freak out about that. Let's just stop here. Let's stop and let's look at the actual causes instead of punishing the effects. Let's stop looking at the symptoms, because the symptoms, it's not going to do nothing. Let's look at the underlying things that are going on that are causing these issues.
That actually brings, you've been really good at like unintentionally guiding the points to be rolling up. But we haven't talked about Richard Crenna yet. And Richard Crenna, who plays the guy that made Rambo, unfortunately, it's been long enough that we can't remember all the names of these characters, just the actors. But like, he comes in and he's the character that comes in a little bit later to kind of be the, okay, this is what you're facing.
He's the spokesperson for Rambo, essentially.
He is. And he secretly wants Rambo to win, or maybe even not so secretly, but he is there. he is there to try and get Rambo out of there alive. I mean, he kind of secretly wants Rambo to win, because if the government put all the time and money and effort into making him what he is and he can't win, then that's like their failure.
Well, he also cares about Rambo.
He does. He feels some responsibility. And, we keep bringing up the moments in this film. You mentioned the deputy shooting from the helicopter. And even the sheriff has a moment there where he's like, God damn it, who's shooting? I said no shooting. Like, there are those moments. And having Richard Crenna come in and basically say like, okay, you've had your say, John. This little war that you've been conducting, it's over. And like, he knows that Rambo has taken things to a level that is unreasonable. He doesn't necessarily condemn him, but he knows that if he keeps going, it's going to end in his death. He says, there's 200 guys out there. There's M16s. You're stuck in this tiny little shack of a police station. They let me come in here to talk you out peacefully. It's like, you're either coming out or you're dying.
Well, it's like he says in the mine, they drew first blood. They drew first blood. I didn't.
And that actually leads to one of the best moments, I think, in Stallone's career. Definitely in the top 5. Like that speech where he's like, it's not over. It's never over. And he just breaks down.
I love that speech. It was beautiful. It brought me to tears. It is such a good speech.
I first saw this movie in 83 or 84. It was on like First Choice or Super Channel, which was a premium movie channel back in the day. I remember just being like riveted by everything. But that speech, it was like a punch to the gut, because I was not expecting that from the film or from Stallone.
You don't expect it in an action film whatsoever for a guy to break down and start crying.
Yeah. I mean, it's it's literally the summation of the whole theme of the film. If the film was like an essay, this is the concluding paragraph. And it literally ends with him just finishing that and then walking out and getting arrested and being walked away with the credits with that terrible pop song. But I think it's like The Long Road or something like that. I think it's a terrible punctuation to the film, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, like that. I think if Rambo had killed more people during the film and acted a little more macho, it might dilute this scene, but I think the scene might still save it. But I think the fact that he actively tried not to, and you have this scene, that makes the movie, that just plants the flag.
I don't know why this film isn't in the best films of all time. Nobody voted for it, yet somebody voted for Hitman.
Well, that was like Zizek, wasn't it? Slavoj Zizek.
I'm just doing crazy films. Like don't question me. Don't judge it.
He's kind of a crazy guy, so that didn't surprise me at all.
Electrocuting an elephant is in the top films, but this is not. 10 seconds of electrocuting an elephant somehow has greater cultural impact than this. All right.
I will say, when the movie does slip into action mode, not so much in the woods, but particularly when he's working his way into town, it does take on a slightly different, slightly less like dramatic, serious air. And the music even helps with that because the music gets like really into it. And those were moments where I was pulled out just a little bit because I don't remember those scenes being that way. I also think it's interesting that back in 1982, the thing that dates this movie the most isn't the clothes, isn't the music, isn't the film
mullet
stock. It's the sound effects. It's the sound design of the film because they're all using these stock machine gun sounds and car sounds and footsteps, like the Foley. Like it sounds like an old movie or an episode of the A-Team, which was disappointing. It'd be neat to see somebody go back and like redo the sound design just to get more modern. It really kind of hits the point home when you have movies like Lethal Weapon, which came a few years later, where they actually distinguished between Riggs and Murtaugh's gun. They wanted them to have the personalities of their characters. So the gunfire, the sounds of the weapons. I think there was probably a renaissance in the 80s where sound designers started like thinking of real world sounds the same way that guys like, Ben Burt would think of how to create an auditory landscape, a sonic landscape for Star Wars, instead of just going to whatever frickin' stock library you have at whatever.
Get the Wilhelm scream out there.
Yeah. But I would be tempted to say that because of those action beats that were a little too actiony, and the fact that, First Blood Part 2 is such an over-the-top action movie, and Rambo 3, like just the way the series has gone, I think people forget this movie. It's hard to forget Rocky as Rocky goes on, but I think it's hard to forget First Blood. I think it's not as hard to forget First Blood when you're looking at the Rambo series and to realize its actual, like, real dramatic roots.
Looking at the action scenes, though, I actually think that that's, from a critique standpoint, adding a bit to the relevancy, because if you look at, let's say, once again, the protests, you look at the protests, you forget about the cause. You forget about all the stuff behind it. It takes you out of the drama, because now all of a sudden you've got a different visceral reaction to what's going on, to what you're seeing. And that's the same thing with the drama. You forget about the human drama of Rambo when you see him running around setting all these traps and whatnot. All of a sudden he's a different person, but that's the thing. We have different aspects to our lives. These people who are protesting the police during a pandemic, they care enough about this to go out there and to do that. But what we don't see is all of them behind the scenes, afraid of the police, afraid for their family, trying to just get by and live the American dream, trying to just do the everyday. It's all forgotten because you see the clips on the news. It's like an action scene. It pulls us out and it makes us forget the human drama. So it almost becomes relevant to real life.
That's such a good point. If people were able to actually see the daily lives of whoever it is, whatever group that you're judging, whether it's racial, gender, religious, class,
political.
If you could walk a mile in that person's shoes and endure what they endure. I remember there was a story. We were talking about myself and my partner at the time and her brother and his partner. We were talking about how women feel threatened when they leave the house, and it's just a given. They just always prepare for whatever threat level might be out there, depending on time of day and whatnot. And he had argued to his partner, he's like, do you actually feel that way? And she was like, all the time, like 110%. And he's like, I don't know if I believe you, because I don't, whenever we're out, I don't see you with that, heightened level of awareness or whatever. And then he stopped mid-sentence, and then he went, but every time we're out, you're with me. So you probably don't feel that threat level, or it's lessened because I'm there. There's somebody with you. And everybody in the room just kind of like looked at him and was nodding, just seeing that realization, because he was operating strictly on like what he sees. And he wasn't thinking outside the box, and he wasn't trying to like, or previously he wasn't empathizing. He wasn't able to put himself in that person's shoes. And once he actually was able to do that, like a whole world opened up to him. And it was a big moment. And I think if some of these people who are standing on their lawns pointing guns at protesters, or going on Facebook or Twitter and screaming about how people shouldn't be fucking up a Target or whatever it happens to be, like if they were able to go through some of the shittiness that these people go through for even like just a 24-hour period, not even like a super long period, I think some stuff would change.
And the thing is, there's a certain level of understanding that people think they have when they don't, because you'll get people who will say, well, I grew up in the Bronx as well. I had the same beginnings. And it's like, yeah, but then you left. And when you walked in somewhere else, nobody assumed that you were from a poor, humble beginning. Nobody assumed a lot of stuff about you. I can talk about how when I was growing up, I remember in the first grade, I had no friends. There was a group of kids in my class that actually chased me around the school with a knife and threatened to kill me. And it was only like months later, after all this pulling it out during class and showing it and like we're going to stab you, that they were like, hey, guess what? It's a fake knife. Ha ha. Not very funny to me. I was 6 years old. This is friggin' traumatic. And I can talk about that and say I understand what it's like to be ostracized. But here's the thing. I went to a new school. All that disappeared. If you're black, you go to a new school, you're still going to be black. So whatever reason that they chose to pick on me, the other group didn't know about it. But if you wear the difference on your skin, if you're wearing a hijab, if you're black, if you're a woman, these are differences that you're always going to live with. You can't just walk across the street to a new group of people and reinvent yourself. So even if you do come from the exact same economic beginnings, there's going to be the social mindset that people have when they look at you. You come into that business meeting wearing a suit, they're like, oh, here's some average rich white guy. Don't matter. If you come in wearing a suit but you're black, they might have some different assumptions about you. And it's always going to be a difference we'll never be able to understand. You hear that story, he doesn't understand his wife or his partner. He has a better understanding, but he doesn't truly understand. And that's a hard thing.
He never will actually fully feel it. He can kind of intellectually wrap his head around it. Yeah. But the experience that she has leaving the house, he can only approximate. Yeah. And that goes for everybody else that feels that judgment, that discrimination, and like the more different you are, the harder it is to keep your head down. Like if you do have a different color of skin, if you are transgendered, if you do have something like a hijab, a head covering of some kind that like is like a huge flag that you're waving saying like, hey, I'm a little bit different than you. It's a target. So, yeah.
It's over, Johnny. It's over. Nothing is over. Nothing. You just don't turn it off. It wasn't my war. You asked me, I didn't ask you. And I did what I had to do to win, but somebody wouldn't let us win. And I come back to the world, and I see all those maggots at the airport protesting me, spitting, calling me baby killer and all kinds of vile crap. Who are they to protest me, huh? Who are they? Unless they've been me and been there and know what the hell they're yelling about.
It was a bad time for everyone, Rambo. It's all in the past now.
For you! For me, civilian life is nothing. In the field, we had a code of honor. You watch my back, I watch yours. Back here, there's nothing.
You're the last of an elite group. Don't end it like this.
Back there, I can fly a gunship. I can drive a tank. I was in charge of $1 million equipment. Back here, I can't even hold a job. Fucking cars! Ah! Back here. Oh, jeez. Oh, God. Where's everybody? God.
I really want to give the masterpiece museum piece to this movie, man.
I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to say this should be on the list. This sucker's a masterpiece.
I agree.
This is a film that lives on, that is still so very relevant.
I agree. I think it has some warts. I mean, just from the conversation alone that we've had here, I think it's pretty obvious how we both feel about it and how we think this fucking movie's pretty timeless. It's sadly timeless. I wish it wasn't. I wish we could watch this and be like, oh man, do you remember when shit like that used to happen? But this thing
I read about it sometime in a history book, but man, to actually see an example.
And just how fucking textbook it is. Like, it's literally, it's like an IKEA instruction book. Like, each moment just has that number where it's like, and this is where things really go wrong. And you just, you see the moments where it could turn around and it doesn't. It's frustrating and wonderful at the same time. And good performances, like, we've kind of touched on it briefly, but like Dennehy is amazing as the sheriff, and Stallone is really, really good as Rambo, and all the other actors, they're just in it and they own it and they sell it. And it's
I'd say the most bland person would have been the Colonel, except for the scene at the end when Rambo's breaking down. Just him trying to hold it together. You can see it on his face. And that shows you just how stoic the person is, but that he still feels, and he's not just an exposition machine.
Yeah. Yeah. And even that bar scene, you can see in Krenna's eyes, like, you know how proud he is of Rambo and how disappointed he is that, or actually he knows he's alive at that point.
You knew he was alive, didn't you? I had a suspicion.
So, yeah. And I've never heard of this director previous to this or after. Like, I don't know what else Ted Kotcheff has done. I'm kind of interested to like
look that up.
Yeah, just see what his filmography is. Like, did he do anything of note after this, or did he just become a TV director, or like, what the fuck? But so yeah, so despite the fact that this is an All Things Considered episode, we are like 100% in agreement that this should be a masterpiece. This thing should be on the list. Maybe it'll be on the list in 2022.
We got to get it so that we are voting on some of this list, because then we'll get Martyrs in here. We'll get First Blood in here. Come on, man, we can do it.
And we'll maybe we'll get Sixth Sense off, but I don't think that'll happen.
We can't unvote stuff. That's not how this works. Come on, Mike.
I actually just got into a discussion about the Sixth Sense again, and there was talk about we should revisit it. So I think that's got to be on the agenda for early 2021.
Let's do it. I'm up. I'm game.
Unless you have anything to add, we can wrap it up.
I'm good to go.
All right. So there you go. That was our thoughts on 1982's First Blood, starring Sylvester Stallone. If you guys have any thoughts on it, on the conversation, I'd apologize for things getting political, but it's a political movie, and
that's the relevance there.
I have no problem.
I have no apologies. No apologies from me.
No apologies from me either. So if this was difficult for you to get through, or you give up on the show, so be it. Leave your thoughts and comments on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. There is a blog that we don't really update as often as we should, but that's at fycshow.wordpress.com. You can also email us at fycshow@gmail.com. What else is there? I guess just like, follow, share, and subscribe on all the platforms. Hit us up on YouTube. Comment walls there are usually quite active. Comment wall, we've been getting a lot of shit on the YouTube comments lately. And I've been responding to some of those in defense of us and our opinions and why we've made the choices that we've made. And I don't get any response to them, which means those people posting those things are just trolls. If you're not going to get into a discussion, why are you bothering even posting anything? So our next film, now that we're back kind of on the rotation of Sight and Sound films, it is Dustin's pick. And Dustin, what did you select for us next time?
I chose a nice, very short film, probably the shortest film we've covered, actually, at, 23 minutes long?
21.
Un Chien d'Andalou.
Now, is it Un Chien d'Andalou or is it Un Chien Andalou?
Un Chien d'Andalou.
Okay. And that is a 1929 film by Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali. Dali! So look forward to that. And with that, I hope everybody out there is staying safe and staying healthy. Thanks again for checking us out and downloading us. Until next time, I've been your host, Mike Josick.
And I've been your other host, Dustin Friesman.
Take care.
Ta-ta.